Welcome everybody to Life, the Universe, and Everything. Panel Snape kills Dumbledore. To kill or not to kill a main character. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that the chat is in the Discord channel there for the C.S. Lewis channel. There will be a Q&A time at the end of the panel, so if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll get them to the panelists at the end of the time. And we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, panelists.
All right. So this is Snape Kills Dumbledore. If the title didn't give you a clue, there will probably be spoilers discussed in this panel. You have been warned. So I'd like to give all of these lovely panelists a minute to introduce themselves. About 60 seconds of who you are, what you do, and why you're here. Who would like to start?
Well, I can start. That's fine. My name is Devri Walls. I am a young adult fantasy author. I am currently working on and known for my YA adult crossover fantasy series called the Venator series. I have been writing and doing panels and all of this jazz for about 10 years now. I love all of it. I love being able to, just kind of expand that creativity in weird ways that usually involves dragons and magic and just the best way to escape the world. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amy?
I can go next.
Or Miss Gardner?
Valerie.
Valerie,
Or
okay.
VJO. Yeah, you might be able to guess I'm kind of into dragons. I write about them in my medieval themed fantasy fractured fairy tales. They're kind of geared young adult and up. I've been writing for, 20 to 30 years and finally started publishing. I have 3 books out, one that's so close, and just life keeps getting in the way, but I'm almost done and ready to get it torn apart by my alpha reader. I've been doing panels for a while now too, and love to encourage young writers to write. And my favorite thing to say is you cannot edit a blank page.
Truth. All right, Amy, now your turn.
Yes. I have published nonfiction. It was an Amazon #1 new release. I'm a retired librarian and current story analyst with the Farmer System of Narrative Analysis. So everything that I bring to the table is usually, comes from science background, a lot of research, national surveys, and I have access to information in those surveys that's not been published yet. So that's what I teach on. I do a lot of work with businesses rewriting creating their modern day fables and rewriting their manuals and textbooks, a lot of tech writing, and moving into, I've got a lot of screenplay work going on right now, working with some movie studios, and currently with looking at doing a lot of green light information and research for movies and combining the green light, the marketing with the story and the screenplay. And I do judging contests. I do a lot of judging as well. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. Happy to join in and give my opinion on killing off the main characters.
Excellent. Rafael.
My name is Rafael Hohmann. I write epic fantasy stories. I just finished a series called the Sunrider series. It's basically Marvel superheroes meets Lord of the Rings epic fantasy. I've done digital art for about 15 years. I love creating maps and putting illustrations in my epic fantasy books. I love having all those little additional things and stories. I think it makes for a very fun book to read. I've been in multiple anthologies, and I've been teaching at panels and conventions for about 5-6 years now.
Excellent. Robert.
Hi, I'm Bob Defendi. I have written games since like 1996. I have 3 novels out currently. They're humorous novels about a game designer who gets shot in the head by a loony fan, ends up in the worst game of all time. In every novel, I kill the same character. He's kind of like Kenny.
Thank you, perfect for this panel. All right. So I wanted to start this panel off with a question of what are your favorite stories where a main character dies?
Are we supposed to like those ones? Is that like a prerequisite? Nobody told me about that.
Just when you think that was well done, maybe you might not have to like it, but
I have to say, I mean, honestly, Star Wars New Hope. I'm sorry, Obi-Wan Kenobi. It was such a huge thing when it happened. And, but you know, at least he gets to come back through the Force and we don't completely lose him. I mean, that.
Go on, sorry. Mine is also New Hope.
I believe that
What is it? Because I mean, do you like the
when Biggs
Darth
dies,
Vader? I was always
when Biggs dies in the novel, I cried for a half hour when I was a kid. I couldn't stop crying because his best friend had just died. I could not. He says, we're a couple of shooting stars, Biggs, and we can't be stopped. And I could not stop crying. I have the same problem with E.T.
I'm sorry, but well,
I think that the character's death has to be meaningful to the story to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know if I have an answer for. I don't know if I have an answer for your question because I'm like racking my brain, and the only thing I come up with is exactly what you just said, which is just it needs to be meaningful, and I need to care a little bit. But I know I'm totally having trouble. Rafael, I'm sure you have an answer. You look like you have an answer.
I was trying not to spit in my chair.
You like it? I just threw him under the bus. I guess nobody's business.
Yeah, you did. Right. You did. Well, I was actually I just mentioned Cormac McCarthy just in my prior panel, so I'll just go with him. The Road. I don't know if you've read the book or seen the movie, The Father in the Road. Spoilers,
Right.
But yeah.
They have been warned.
They were warned. Dave Wolverton, Dave Farland, as some of you know him, said, he's a Writers of the Future judge, one of the head ones. And he says for him, usually the stories that make it to win the competition are the ones that make him cry the most. But character deaths, the only way that they're going to have that significance or that meaning is if they have purpose to them. If it's just for senseless murder or for shock value, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to tick off your reader. Mm-hmm. So, it's got to have meaning. Characters coming back from the grave, or, it weakens the impact of their death oftentimes. So I tend to say, hey, don't bring your characters back. If they die, they're going to die. If you're going to bring them back, okay, that's fine. But understand it might weaken the death a little bit. I mean, if you're Bob and you're having the same character die every single book, I think, there's, I think he does it perfect with his stories. Your Kenny style deaths, then I think that's
become a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And he always comes back with the same name, but with a Roman numeral at the end. So you can tell what book you're reading by what Omar's name is. Oh, it's Omar 4. I'm on the 4th book.
Very nice.
How you handle the death. E.T. I can't remember if the book actually came out before the movie or if I just got the book before I was able to see the movie. It's like 3 paragraphs between when E.T. dies and when he comes back to life. It's like, 30 seconds in the movie or whatever. It took me a long time to get through those 3 paragraphs because I was crying so hard as a small child when I read that book, right? I did not know he came back to life. I could not physically read the book to find out that he comes back to life. E.T. had just died. It destroyed me. It was so ruinous to me as a small child. So yeah. Star Wars and E.T. were the most like formative deaths when I was a kid. Biggs and E.T.
Speaking of, the ones that I experienced as a kid, Bridge to Terabithia. I was 4th grade when that came out, and our teacher read it to us. And I'll tell you, I, as an adult, did not remember the death. I had to reread it because I changed that ending in my head. She was living in Terabithia, and the Eagles came and swooped her up and took her off with them. I had this whole vision that had to have been a dream. It wasn't until I reread it as an adult that I went, wait, she really did die. Oh my goodness. I had totally blanked that out. Unlike Where the Red Fern Grows, which I knew, or Old Yeller, I'm sorry, Dead Dogs. And my fiction writing does include Dead Dogs because that was such a tremendous blow to me.
Have you ever read any of Robin Hobb's books? He has a wolf character called Night Eyes. That's I think I'm gonna piss a lot of people off with that. You read that series. I think the first book's called like Royal Assassin. If you want dog deaths, that's a painful one to read. You'll cry.
I had to make sure that in my story, it's an old dog, and he got the last 2 weeks of his life were like the best ever. Yeah.
All right. I think it might be time for the next question. What?
Hit us. What you got, Drea?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. When is killing? We'll kind of hit a little bit on this about how we think it needs to be meaningful. When is killing a main character good or bad?
Does it push the plot forward? If it doesn't, if it's just for shock value, then it's bad.
Sometimes it's just something you have to do. When I wrote the third Death by Cliche novel, one of the main characters is a cat, and I fully intended that cat and his group to come back for every subsequent novel. And the cat was based on my cat, and my cat died during editing. And so I rewrote the ending to have the cat and the whole group basically symbolically moving into the cat afterlife, and then ended it with like a tribute to the dead cat. And so all of the readers reading it know that cat's moved on. We're never going to see him again. Bob's cat's dead.
Aww.
I think Rafael really hit it on the head. It really has to move. If you're going to kill off character, it has to move the plot forward. Like this is critical for the readers to feel like you didn't betray them, right? Because otherwise you feel, I think it's very easy for readers to feel like the author is like a evil puppet master, right? Just toying with their emotions if it's not done for a reason and not done well. And I think the other aspect of that I'd love to hear everyone talk about is the character authenticity for that process. Sure, there are ways as authors that we can maybe get around killing someone, but is it authentic to the story and the characters that you've created?
Right. I would actually say there's a checklist. The first checklist, which is the number one, is how does this drive your main character or the character who we're following? Because every story, setting, then plot, then character being the most important, then plot, setting. So how does this affect your character? Does this motivate your character? How does this drive your character forward or backward? And if it doesn't do any of those things, reconsider the death. Then secondarily, how does this move the plot forward? And then tertiary is how will this emotionally impact the reader? But if it's just for the sake of shock, like I said, shock value, just to make your reader sad or just to get rid of an extraneous character, then it's not necessarily the best idea. It can be done, but you have to make it realistic.
On plot, I would add theme. Sometimes,
theme.
Sometimes you have a theme of death, and if you have a theme of death, people are going to have to die.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at story structure, a lot of the time the death. So we have your main character that's moving through the story, and you have the safe character. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi is a safe character or a mentor. And in order for Luke to move forward and not rely on his main character, his safe character, to be able to take the power in himself and be able to go forward, Obi-Wan really did have to die. And there's a story, an old play that's one of the, it's a children's play, but it's got really, really great history in it. It's called Wily and the Hairy Man. And in Wily and the Hairy Man, when he's at home, his mom is his safe character. She's his protection from the hairy man, because the hairy man's going to come get him and get him like his dad, like the hairy man got his daddy. And when he's out in the woods, the hairy man's terrified of dogs. So the dog is Wily's safe character. Well, equivalent to a death, when the hairy man lures away the dog and Wily's in the forest, he has no safe character to protect him. It is all on him to save himself, because there is no safe character for him, no buffer. And through the 3 acts, by the end, his mom gets frozen by the hairy man. The dog is frozen by the hairy man. And he thinks they're dead, basically, but it is completely on him. It's not just a dog that's going to escape and come back and save him. It's not a mom that's going to come save him. It's totally up to Wily. So taking out or killing off a safe character, somebody that has, your main character's been relying on, is sometimes crucial. And that's the way I feel Dumbledore's death moved the story forward. Yeah. Harry needed to stand on his own 2 feet.
Yes, death of the mentor is one of the key steps in the hero's journey. It doesn't actually have to be an actual death, but some way to separate.
Yes.
So that the main character has to stand on their own.
Exactly.
And to build what Rafael said, sometimes it'll be like an integral part of a character's character arc. Like if a character has something in their past about dealing with grief and not dealing with it well, that character is going to have to face grief again, and we're going to have to see them, how they've grown and how they deal with it, and somebody's going to have to die for that to happen,
And if you want to break tradition, break trope, because usually, for example, the mentor character at some point in the story is going to die, right? You want to break trope, and you don't want the mentor character to die, but instead you want the main characters, so-and-so, this other character to die. That's usually not the trope character that dies. You have to still give us an appropriate arc so that we can understand, we get that emotional impact. Our job as writers is to draw out emotion in our readers. It's this weird psychological cat and mouse game where we're drawing them in, pulling them out, drawing them in, so when we have these impactful moments in a story, we can, we're like bursting the dam. Our readers, they'll sit there and just, they'll feel that death as if it's someone that they actually knew die. And if you can make your readers feel that, then you've succeeded. But the only way to do that is to create characters that have goals, have ambitions, have dreams, and figure out, in what situation can I put my character in that when they do die, it can draw out those emotions. For example, my character is about to fulfill their lifelong dream, and throughout the entire book, we've written it out so this character's story arc is him working towards achieving this goal or this dream. And right when he's about to achieve it, and we're rooting for him for this entire story, these 200-300 pages, he gets to that goal, gets to that dream, and then he dies right when he's about to achieve it. Then we get that impactful emotion. There's different ways that you can play it to really draw out the emotion from your readers.
A common conversation I have with my mother is, she goes, I don't like it when writers manipulate me. I say, no, you don't like it when you notice writers manipulate you.
Exactly.
Their only job is to manipulate you.
Yeah.
Emotion is the only gateway
Two of the biggest compliments I ever got on a book. It was the same book. 2 different characters died. When one character died, the beta reader threw the book at the wall, crossed her arms, and was grumpy. And when her roommate says, "Oh, are you done with the book? Can I read it?" No. She finally did finish the book. But I mean, that was great. And then I had a reviewer on another character that died. apparently she cried for 2 hours, curled up in the fetal position on her bed. Those were the two greatest compliments I've ever received as a writer, because I knew that those characters had impact. Their deaths moved the story forward, and they affected the reader.
That's why it's really difficult to write a successful. It's possible, but it's very difficult to write a successful death scene within the first couple chapters of a book, because we haven't yet developed enough about a character to achieve that impact. You can find certain books written by very, very skillful authors that can give you emotional impact right off the bat, but it's very, very difficult to do so, because as a writer or as a reader, we'll be reading it. Oh, this person died. We don't understand why that's meaningful yet.
Yeah. We don't care about them. Exactly.
If Bran had died when he was crippled at that point in George R.R. Martin, it would have had meaning. I mean, he did a really, really, really good job of making us care about Bran right before he was pushed off that tower.
But that's why it's writing.
Yeah, it was very skillfully handled. It was very skillful. Actually, one of the authors that I think is masterful at this is Kuntz. Kuntz has the shortest run up to the beginning of a novel of any author. He often has 1 to 1.5 pages before all hell breaks loose in his books, and I just don't know how he does it. And all of a sudden, by page 2, everything's fallen apart, and I'm like, dude, how am I already into these characters?
Yep. I don't know.
Are you already invested?
Yeah, I would say, for sake of discussion, there is a slight difference between the Kuntz example and what Rafael was talking about. I think the Kuntz, he's invested because it's a lot easier for us to look at everything, going to hell in a handbasket. And we are like, what if that happened to me? We can make that relation of, this is horrible. But when someone dies that we don't care about, it is far more difficult to create that emotional connection because we don't care. And unfortunately, we are surrounded by death. People die and it's sad, but then there's next level sad. And we want to get them, the readers to next level sad.
Have you ever seen one of those Facebook videos or YouTube videos, 5 minutes long, and it will tell you very briefly this, this little story. It won't tell you the whole story arc of their entire life, but it'll show you this person, went through this experience, went through their life, and then they died in this situation. And you watch, it's a 5-minute Facebook video, but at the end of it, you're bawling. And you're like, how? Oh, yeah. In 5 minutes? Which is the equivalent of reading, 2 pages, 3 pages in a book. So you need to start your characters off with a bang. I say, you should do your best.
Well, and I would argue that, in Charlotte's Web, I mean, I'm invested in that pig that I've not even met yet. Mm-hmm. When Fern's dad is taking the axe and going to kill the runt pig, I'm like, no. And that brings me to the next thing. If you're going to kill your main character, or they're going to die, Charlotte in Charlotte's Web, you need to have a different conduit into the story. You need to have a different central viewpoint character that's telling the story of that main character. So there is enough of a remove that, number one, you can handle it. Number two, you can finish the story after Charlotte's dead.
I think that's going to depend on the reader, if I'm being totally honest. I think just based on what I know about you from the 5 seconds that we talked before, with my daughter, you're an animal lover, and my daughter's the same way. So she reacts much more intensely to deaths of animals than I do. So no, I totally, it was so interesting. Yeah.
One of the techniques I've seen, I wouldn't say it's universal or anything, but one of the techniques I've seen used very effectively is you almost always see a dramatic tonal shift right before a character dies. In a film, it's sometimes 5 seconds, maybe 3 seconds. Right before Obi-Wan dies, everything goes quiet. Everything pauses for him to make the decision, right? Larry Niven and Purnell in Lucifer's Hammer, there's a scene where 2 mountain climbers or maybe they're geologists, are on top of a mountain that they know is a dormant volcano when the asteroid hits. And so they both know that as soon as the tremors hit the thing, they're about to be on the biggest volcanic eruption in recent history. And so they both know it. Neither of them say it. One of them has gone blind because he was looking at the meteor impact. And so it's this very peaceful discussion where the one is describing to the other everything he sees for the last moments of their lives. And it's like those kind of like complete emotional shifts that really like prepare us as a reader or a watcher that something's about to happen, get into the right emotional place for it.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome discussion to have on like the pacing of those scenes, because that's really it's how we pace that heightens that emotional impact. And I think that that's something that happens throughout the book, right? I think we've hit on that a couple of times, whereas the pacing needs to be adjusted for that death to be significant on how we laid out, but also in that moment, exactly like Bob said, like the sentence structure starts to change, the topics start to change, all of that adjusts so that we as the reader flip into this place of this is very significant and we feel it more. I think that was a beautiful example of that.
Right. If you're going to have a character die in the first 3 pages, give us the story arc in the first 3 pages. Don't extend it to 20 pages of story arc, but create something that's significant within 3 pages. Well, that's why it's difficult to do a successful death that early on. One of the most recent deaths in a book that kind of affected me actually was from Kings of the Wild. I don't know if you guys read that book. It's basically all these old guys that kind of get the band back together again they're like mercenaries, warriors, epic fantasy. They're old retired heroes. And there's this one character. It's like this, I'm trying to remember, it's been a couple of years since I read it, but it's this 2-headed troll kind of a character. And the head, one of the heads, he's got a few more mental problems, and the other head kind of takes care of his brother, and they're it's this really loving brother relationship. We know about this character for about 3 chapters, and they end up throwing themselves off of this ice bridge to save one of the characters, and they fall all the way down. And the main character ends up falling down and landing next to him. He sees this 2-headed troll, and his brother that had the issues is dead, but the other head is still alive, and he's singing to his brother, to comfort him as they're passing. And then eventually they both pass away. But it was just one of the most emotionally impactful death scenes that I've read recently that I thought was really, really enjoyable to read.
And building it up, like in Of Mice and Men, of course, you have like one of the greatest death scenes of all times, at least in the play. And they build it up to the whole thing with "Tell me about the farm, tell me about the rabbits," and then in the stage play, the movie, most recent movie blew this kind of, but in the stage play, you're watching it, and Lenny is asking him to tell him about the rabbits, and he has Lenny kneel down in front of him, and he stands behind him with the gun. And the stage goes to absolute blackness as he's telling him about the rabbits. And the last thing you see is on perfectly black stage is him saying, "I can see it, George, I can see it." And then the gunshot hits on the perfectly black stage, and it's just the perfect tonal shift, but that's been threaded through the whole play.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing to point out for people who are working on this and trying to figure out how to do this, right? Is that thread, because as authors, we do have the advantage of, even if at the last minute, right, we realize, oh my gosh, this character is going to die. We haven't turned this book in yet. Like, this book is not done, right? We can then go back and thread through these beautiful moments to heighten the stakes across that whole arc and to make that scene exactly what it really needs to be. And I think sometimes new writers forget that, right? And they also forget, because I like your opinion, I find it fascinating how easy it is to do something like that. You think, oh, it's going to be this huge rewrite, and it's not. You go back and it's a few details here, a few details there, and you've just transformed that.
It's like 4,000 words usually, yeah.
Usually some good techniques to do that is go back and, add inter-character relationships, because the deaths are going to be seen through your other characters. How are those deaths impacting your characters? Go back, add more relationship scenes, add, development between the characters, whether it's friendships or animosity or whatever it might be. Add emotional beats. Make sure that in your writing, you try to hit at least a couple of emotional beats per page. These emotional beats are emotional actions or emotional reactions to the events or to other characters. Keep hitting those emotional beats consistently in your storytelling, and that allows your readers to delve into a almost a hypnotic state where they're experiencing the same emotions as your characters.
Another technique is to telegraph one character dying and then switch. Like in The Stand, they build up one character dying pretty significantly. They tell you a character isn't coming back. They build up the character dying. They show you him, essentially dying, and they ignore him for 7 chapters. And you're just like, all right, well, that was it. He was the one who died, right? And then, like 7 chapters later, the dog shows up and wakes him up, right? And you're like, what? Wait, what? And it's just such a huge surprise when it happens, and it turns you on your head. You're like, okay, wait, what? I'm confused, right? And that kind of, and I can't remember. I honestly can't remember if you know who the person who's actually dying is at that point in the book. I can't remember anymore. But or if you've already gotten it and it's the reveal after, or if at that point you're like, oh shit, who's going to die? But it's just such a powerful technique to pull the rug out of, because you've already told them, you've telegraphed it. They know, they're emotionally prepared for a character to die. So you're not cheating, you're just giving them that last twist reveal, It can be really
just be careful not to do that too often, though, because then that kind of gets rid of the impact of death, and people are going to expect you to miraculously bring characters back.
That's the type of thing you do over an entire book.
Exactly.
Well, you still have to kill you still have to kill a character, right?
Right.
Poor Drea is raising her hand. Drea, what question would you like to ask us?
Pay attention to me. All right, so we've been skirting along, actually headed towards this already, but I would like to hone in more on how do you make the character's death meaningful. So we've been leading this way, but I'd like to hone in a bit more on that.
My personal opinion and what I've done, because I had one of those moments where in a series I realized the main character was going to die. And I cried, and then I spent months trying to figure out a way around it, and I could not. So instead, I set out to, just make it as meaningful and beautiful as possible. My personal writing style is very emotion and character driven. And so I did really what we've talked about, which is pull in all of those moments between individual characters, right? Where we get these heightened connections. And we create these moments where when we look back in hindsight, we can see the lessons and the impact of that death ripple out in both good and negative ways. So it doesn't seem meaningless. It's not senseless. It has that power and emotional connection. And then you get the messages, hopefully, like we talked about, which is you ripped my heart out, but it was so well done. And I don't know how else you would have done it. I still don't like it, but I cried for 3 weeks. But it's the character connections. It's taking the time and slowing it down.
Sometimes
I have one character, the one that the book got thrown when he died. He started out a very unlikable character, and by the time he died, you got fond of him. You began to understand and identify more with him. And when he died, it was his choice. He knew he was going to die, and he chose to sacrifice in a way. And so it made it mean more because he knew what he was doing. He knew that his actions would cause his death, very likely. But the person he saved, to him, was more important. And that showed his growth as a character. And so sometimes you have to make sure that, when the character dies, it's something that does mean something because of the growth of the character and the potential.
Did they die achieving their goal? Did they die trying to achieve their goal and they failed and they died trying? When we are hit with emotions about deaths of real people in our lives, we always, return to the thoughts of, the potential that they had, of, all that they did for the community and the people around them, for the hole that will be left behind from them being gone. And so when you create or write your characters, create those aspects of a character so that when they do die, a reader feels that hole that's missing.
That's what I was trying to say.
Exactly.
You want to work with your positive and negative space like a painter.
Exactly.
In the Master and Commander novels, one of the main characters dies in like book 18, 19 or something like that. And the entire battle and scenes afterwards, everything that character would have done, they are not there for. And you feel the hole that they left on that ship. The ship is not functioning right because they're not doing their job. And you just, I don't think they ever call it out, but you just feel the gaping wound left in the mechanics of that social structure by that character going. If you have a person's spouse die, show them walking in and show the scene that you've shown 3 times before where they walk in and say hello to their spouse and them not be there, right? And just that moment when they're not there, that's the moment that kills you.
That just, that gave me chills. That's masterful writing. Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever notice that the very first Columbo movie, ever watch the very first Columbo movie? The very first Columbo movie, he solves the crime in the first 10 seconds because he loves his wife. He's in the guy's apartment when the killer walks in, and the killer doesn't say, "Hi, honey, I'm home." And he knows that the killer killed his wife. Because it's unfathomable to Columbo that a man would walk into his house and not say hello to his wife the first thing he does. And when he doesn't, he knows the guy already knows his wife is dead. And so just little things like that, how, those little social fabrics.
Little emotional impacts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I have a character in one of the books I'm working on. She's a wheelchair bound female. She's an alchemist. And in the first chapter, she witnesses her husband being executed. And her husband and her always have this argument about who pushes the wheelchair, even though she's just like, she doesn't want to be pushed. She can, roll herself forward. And, in the next, scene, she's just sitting there. She's like waiting for her husband to push her wheelchair and for them to have that argument. And no one pushes that wheelchair. And she's just sitting there. She's like, oh, I guess I got to roll myself. And, and it's just, the impact of how one character affects another character and how, because we're reading and writing through other characters. So how does that death affect the character we are seeing this world through?
Well, in the story that I was working on, the one character is fairly invincible and is trying to figure out what life is, a 3D printed transhuman that's, trying to figure out what is it to be human, what is this feeling. And the boy, he, feeling guilty for his mother's death, wants nothing but to die. He's to be given superpowers while and a death sentence at the end of it. He's like, hey, sign me up. I'm there. That's what I want. I want to go out a hero, and I get all this stuff in the meantime. And she can't fathom it. She's just madder than mad that he's given something that she doesn't have and has no opportunity to have. At the end moment, when he's ready to sacrifice himself, she goes in instead, locks him away, and she goes in and sacrifices herself for that. And there's a discussion in the middle of the story where they're just at odds and they separate because of this, huge problem until she shows up at the end and saves him. And so it's those relationships and that sudden switch of who you expect to die. I loved how you said that. And it gets swapped out with somebody else that maybe for an ulterior purpose, but they have to have that purpose. That has to be who they are intrinsically. And they know that they have to sacrifice themselves, and you have to build it up right.
Should we open it up to questions for everybody? Because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes left. Were there any listener, watcher questions?
See, Snape was a garbage person.
Let's see. We've got a question here. Is there ever a time you want to spring a death on your audience?
Oh, sure.
You do it in a surprise way, yeah. But as long as you follow the processes of making sure that the death is meaningful.
I think a good example of that being okay too would be death as a trigger, like the trigger point that makes the other character cross the line that they said they would never cross. And it's that I think would be a sudden one that would work for me, in my opinion.
Everybody always complains about how
I've-
Tasha Yar died in Star Trek Next Generation, and I always loved it because they always make such a big deal when a main character dies in a TV show, and to have one die so inconsequentially for once spoke so well to who she was as a security person, who she was as like a soldier. I always loved the fact that she just died just randomly in a fight for no reason, right? Just because a bad guy wanted to make a point. I just
Sounds like the ending of Supernatural.
right.
I've started a book with a death,
Oh,
and it kind of gets the ball rolling. But the death has basically occurred right before the opening. So
my favorite surprise death is from the Firefly series in Serenity.
Yeah.
So it can be done really well. I know that one's controversial. Lots of people don't like that happened, but it did accomplish something story-wise.
But I'll point out that they did the exact same thing that I was telling you about with the other. They thoroughly prepared you for another character to die. They telegraphed there was going to be a death. They, really built you up that people were going to die. And so once they mentally prepared you for people to die, people can start dying, and they kind of did it backwards
Suspense
because
from that point.
yeah, because he dies first and then the others, they do it backwards, but it's really well done.
Next question.
Yeah, Joseph Jones asks, are there times when the reader can feel joy when the character dies? What would be an example of that?
You mean like bad guys or like
Like Voldemort or
we hate our main character so much? Oh,
I'm sure I've cried with joy when a character made a noble sacrifice. I'm trying to. It was probably in a Japanese anime at some point, and I'm not pulling up.
I don't think the emotion necessarily
it's
is
the bittersweet.
Yeah, it's more of a bittersweet than it is a pure joy, because it's really hard to feel joy for anybody dying. I mean, unless it's like Hitler, and that it's. But either way, you got to give.
Is it joy or is it relief?
It's relief, and it's a bittersweet relief, because so much has been lost. Because but I can't really. See...
I was going to say you can certainly feel triumph, like Randy Quaid at the end of Independence Day. That is a stand-up and cheer moment when he dies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're all hanging up on the word joy specifically.
Joy.
Yeah.
Can we be glad about it?
Satisfaction,
happy in some form
relief.
or fashion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question, please.
Okay, Edge Dancer 07 asks, how should you write about a character who you never knew and didn't write about before they died, but the main character knew them and is sad?
Well, then you should know that character really well. It's because you have to have that emotional impact coming through the character, which means you need to understand the connection to that person's life. You need to understand how they impacted them. Go ahead, Rafael.
I was gonna say, if you don't know the character, the character has to symbolize something for the main character who we're following. For example, I have a character in my book he's just barely left this academy of warriors. Basically, he's a hero, and he's going to go accomplish his first mission on the field. He's being evaluated, And his first mission is basically a hostage situation where this horrible monster has kidnapped this little girl. And he goes with the father of the little girl, who's a woodcutter, through the woods, and they have this long discussion, and they develop this friendship, and they get to the monster. And the hostage situation is just a situation where it's just an impossible situation. He's never met the little girl, but the little girl dies, and he fails at the mission. Now, the character didn't necessarily know this little girl. He's never met her before until the moment where he gets to her, he tries to rescue her, and she dies. But there was symbolism behind who the character was. The girl meant the mission, meant his success, meant his dreams and his ambitions being on the line. So if the character has never been met before, the character has to at least symbolically mean something. It has to be impactful in some way other than just, oh, this character died. Where did that impact, how did that impact the character who we are following, our POV?
But to go back,
and I feel like, you have to meet that character that died on the page through your main character, who's telling the story and is feeling the grief.
Mm-hmm.
You have to see some of those interactions that made it personal and such a tragedy. I mean, is there the guilt that they're carrying on, or what reason is there that they are still carrying that burden of that death and showing that in the page?
Two of the fairly inviolate rules of writing is you cannot have a character fall in love with a character that the readers don't love, and you can't have a character laugh at a joke that the readers don't laugh at. And I think that carries through to this. Like you were saying before, if you don't know the character, you can't not know the character if the main character knew the character. You have to know them as well as the main character did.
And we are going to run out of time. I want to add one super fast, speedy caveat. So Amy said, it was so well said, excellent. When she talks about showing, though, don't be tempted to write 47 pages of backstory and italicized scenes, like just little snippets, little comments, little remembrances. That's all it takes. Okay, that's my caveat. I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, if you, the author, don't know this character when you're starting out, revision. Revision fixes many, many things. All right.
And you can, because
yeah. Closing remarks. So yeah, 2 minutes, about 30 seconds each. Where can we find you next, or final thoughts?
I guess we just want to go around the loop here. So my name is Weird, so that's where I am everywhere. So Devri Walls, website, Instagram, Facebook, all the things. Please come find me. I love to talk to my readers. My books are available for purchase on my website, and we have a lot of fun. So come on over. I think Amy, you're next. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't figure out which way we were going. I am currently buried in a barn, so you can find me along all the manure and the shavings and the alfalfa. But I love talking story and development and screen and script and text analysis. I'm working with some movie people, so I will actually have an office in the Provo Town Mall with the crew, and you can get a hold of me via my email. It's kind of a weird one. saltzworks@gmail.com, SALTZWORKS, or secondsitestudio.com. And there's second-site-studio.com, and shoot me some information if you like.
Raf?
You can find me at my website and on Facebook. Just search up my name online or through Facebook. I'll just add you as a friend if you ever have any questions about writing, or if you just want to chat about fantasy books or want to look up my fantasy books online. Just feel free to give me, a message. Currently, I'm just working on a giant epic fantasy series full of maps, diagrams, images, character profile sheets, all sorts of fun stuff. It's kind of becoming more than just a fantasy book. It's got a lot of extras in it.
Excellent. Bob?
VGO, you go first. I think a cat's about to invade my feed.
Well, you probably heard my cats wrestling in the background. You can find me at vjogardner.com. I'm also on Facebook, and I've got 3 published books: Blood of Ancient Kings, Servant Queen, Dracona's Rebirth. I've got a 4th one I'm praying I get out really soon, Servant Queen. And yeah, love to chat online when I have time. So
All right, Bob.
This is Lady Fluffington von Furryface, and she she doesn't think anybody should ever die, ever. Her last owner died. She is dead against it, and she has very strong opinions. She has very strong opinions. I'll be moderating a panel on dungeon crawlers at 8:00. Yes.
Okay. And yes, I'm Drea Gryphon. I also write and do art. So if you want to find me, DreaGryphon.com. And thank you all for attending our panel.
Thank you.
bye. Thanks for coming.